Everyone has already heard of empathy, and probably everyone thinks they know what it means. The most common answer to conceptualize empathy is that empathy means putting yourself in someone else's shoes. But what exactly does this mean? And is it just that? How does our brain work so that we can have behaviors perceived as empathic? And why did the evolution of the human species selected this trait as essential for our survival? These are the questions we are going to answer in today's video. Want to know more? Stay here, and if you like our content, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any news. The concept of empathy has been the subject of philosophical, psychological, biological, and sociological discussions over time. It is a multi-determined concept, and there are different definitions for the various areas of knowledge that address it. Even though it has been extensively studied, there are still disagreements about its meaning, origin, and manifestations. Nowadays, both evolutionary and neuronal origins of empathy and its psychological manifestations have been the subject of scientific research. According to them, in general, empathic behavior means the ability to identify and even feel other people's emotions. But to better understand this phenomenon, let's take a step at a time. First, why was empathy important to our species' evolution, to the point where it was naturally selected? The theory of natural selection by Darwin and Wallace was responsible for explaining that characteristics present in groups of living organisms are naturally selected according to their usefulness for the survival of the species in its environment. Thus, for Darwin, the less adapted organisms died, and those with more efficient characteristics for the maintenance of their survival in that particular environment survived. But what does this have to do with empathy? In the early days of humanity, it is believed that hominids that exhibited more pro-social behaviors, such as noticing when others needed help and acting on behalf of the group, were more likely to organize into cohesive groups and thus survive. But how do these empathic behaviors arise neurologically speaking? Science has already revealed the existence of a hormone called oxytocin, released during contact with offspring of any species, including ours. This hormone was initially discovered in females who produced it during pregnancy, labor, and the breastfeeding phase. This substance is responsible, among other things, for creating the mother's interest in her offspring, generating affective bonds that motivate her to take care of the baby. Nonetheless, later it was discovered that this hormone is also present in males of different species, and that it is activated when there is the social interaction of cooperation and affection between subjects. Oxytocin is released whenever we have a perception of the other's needs, whenever we act to help or care for others, as well as when we are helped and cared for. This is the hormone responsible for creating empathic behavior. But going back to evolution, today we already have a very deep knowledge about genetics, which is what determines our characteristics at birth, which are inherited from our ancestors after being selected, and about epigenetics, how genes manifest depending on the environmental events experienced by each individual. In other words, nowadays, it is not that those who have less favorable characteristics will die, only the strongest and most adapted will survive. No, In fact, depending on what happens in each person's life, some of their genes may or may not be activated, and the capacity for greater or lesser production of oxytocin is genetically and epigenetically determined. So, the more affection and cooperation you receive throughout life, especially during childhood, the more likely you are to develop oxytocin production and to empathize and behave empathically. That's why it's so important to give our children a non-violent education based much more on cooperative rather than competitive principles. Just as violence begets violence, affection begets affection, empathy begets empathy. So, what about you? What do you think about evolutionary, neurochemical, and psychological effects of empathy? Leave your comments below and tell us what empathy is for you and at what times you can notice empathic behavior in your day-to-day life. All our sources are based on published scientific researches, which you can find on the links at the description. And if you want more scientific communication about those topics, subscribe to our channel and tap the bell button. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.